Hello. Oh, God. I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. Is this okay? Great. Thanks for being here. We can't see any of you, so if you need to get up and leave, we understand. We won't notice. Lots of bright lights up here. Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the next hour and a half for this tasting. There's a little QR code that will pop up on the screen if you haven't already done it. I promise I'm not collecting your info, but it pops up a kind of virtual tasting mat and some kind of tasting flavor wheel type things, as well as our Instagram handles. Surprise. If you need to get in touch with us afterwards. So I highly recommend you scan to access that information. My name is Claire Sprouse. I am based in New York. I used to live in San Francisco, where I have a wine bar where we do wine and beer-based cocktails. It's called Buddy. I also do some consulting, and I'm your moderator for today. And I would love to introduce our panel. We have Kurt Rogers to the right of me, ambassador for Lusteau, based out of Florida. Matthew Belanger, formerly New York, now LA.
Correct.
General manager of Death & Co. in Los Angeles and cocktail guru extraordinaire. And then Nicola Olianas. I'm sure all of you, he needs no introduction, but the Branca Global Ambassador. So thank you all for being here from many different time zones. So today we're going to talk about vermouth, a little bit of some 101 history, and then we'll get into the tasting, and we'll try to get to the tasting sooner rather than later. And really this is about another kind of discussion, hopefully building on past discussions, or maybe this is new to all of you, but taking vermouth out of just that modifier, bottle in the well that you pick up every so often, into something that is used much more often in your menus and in your cocktails in general, and really just exploring the different types and styles of vermouth together. So what is vermouth? It is a fortified and aromatized wine. Fortified meaning wine that has had a distilled spirit added to it, thus increasing its alcohol content and fortifying it. And aromatized meaning wine flavored with fruits, spices, and florals. On the little QR code, I included a flavor wheel that I stole from Vine Pair, great publication. And I really think, our flavor references are something that evolve constantly. Some of these flavor wheels that you come across for spirits and wine can be a little Western-centric in terms of its reference points, right? But I think that it's really important as you all, and ourselves included, go through life tasting, that we're always trying to find vocabulary. So I encourage you to find a flavor wheel or reference point that works for you so that you can identify the flavors that you're picking up. We also, on that QR code, I kind of created a little chart that has a space for you to kind of plot what we're tasting today. So hopefully that helps you kind of identify where all of these fall into the spectrum of vermouth. And just to take a step back before we get into our tasting, I just want to kind of talk about the history of fortified wines, flavored wines, We have actually, long before we started making martinis, there has been evidence, artifacts showing that people have been flavoring, aromatizing wine for over 3,000 years now, dating back to the Middle East. And I have some examples of urns from China where they found evidence of wine that had been infused with chrysanthemum and honey. These were used for medicinal purposes. And this is a map of the Silk Road. We're not talking about silk, but this is, I think, really a great example. Also shows a great example of the movement of traditions and movement of flavors and movement of culture across land. So starting in China, if you look at a timeline, you start to see evidence of aromatized, infused wines throughout history, kind of following this same path of the Silk Road, this path of spice trading as well. So from China to India, Iran, what is now Iran, through the Western Asia and into the Mediterranean, and then up through Italy, which we'll talk about, and France, and then eventually getting over to the United States. In terms of how we think about kind of our, how I think Vermouth as we know it today evolved, bringing it a little bit into more modern history. We have examples dating back to Hippocrates. This is a quote from a great philosopher, medicine man: "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food." And really these traditions starting in parts of the far east in Asia coming over to Europe really carried on in terms of people using wine as a vehicle to deliver medicine to people in need. So whether that was for digestion or all sorts of reasons, it was the vehicle for that. And so they would use these botanicals, these herbs, flowers that they identified that had medicinal benefits, and infuse it into the wine. And we have recipes dating back to Hippocrates, and then further down into Italy, and Arnel de Villanova, which I'm probably saying wrong, distilling wines for the first time, creating the first eau de vie out of fruits and vegetables, and beginning like the birth of fortified aromatized wines in 1250. And then jumping even further into Europe, into Italy with Alexis of Piedmont, who has a very famous manual that references a lot of Italian recipes for fortifying wines and really laying down the foundation for Vermouth today and the more modern history that we're going to get into. So all of that being said, we're going to just jump into tasting. It's past 1 o'clock, so why not?
Yeah, let's get it.
And I'm going to pass this on to some of our experts here as we move forward. But I'll just kick off with tasting with dry vermouth. So we have our first glass, and please feel free to taste as you like. We're not going to do a lot of swirling around with you all, but please feel free to nose, taste, spit. Don't spit, as we move through these. And we have a cocktail waiting for you at the end too, so pace yourself. So I'm just jumping a little bit in front of history here because I want to acknowledge that we're going to go back to the 18th century and the 1700s and talk about Italian vermouth in a moment. But just for a linear progression of flavor, we're going to start with dry vermouth. So 1813, there's already examples of vermouth on the market, but this is really the first example of a commercial dry style, and it was invented by Joseph Noilly in France. And the area of France is right on the Mediterranean. So you, as you taste, maybe you're noticing some notes of a little bit of that sun-kissed, salt-kissed, botanicals flavors that you would kind of associate with the Mediterranean, as opposed to some of the alpine flavors or interior flavors that we'll get into in a moment. The dry style of vermouth really is, tends to be very little to zero sugar. I love Noilly Prat. The extra dry is what we're tasting today because it is such a great example of such a classic, assertive dry vermouth. I think as you get to experience other dry vermouths, you'll just tend to see some that are a little bit more mild, but this is a big dry vermouth, and to me it's the most classic. It's full of herbaceousness. You get that floral, citrus, tart note that makes for, some of our best classic dry vermouth cocktails. Speaking of, I want to hold on the martini for a second. So we're gonna, as we taste through these categories, just talk about a few cocktails that are hallmarks of each category, but also I think cocktails that are special to us or represent like why vermouth belongs in cocktails in the first place. So just setting aside the martini for a second, I want to talk about another great classic, the Clover Club. Matthew, you chose this cocktail, and I think it's a great way to kick this off because we all want to start by talking about vermouth as a martini, boozy beverage, but we are starting it with a citrus drink.
Yeah, I thought it was important to have examples of both, like big, broad categories of cocktails represented, like stirred stuff and shaken stuff, because I think, again, the stirred ones, the martini, come most immediately to mind, but there is certainly a lot of like classic context, and most of what we'll talk about, as examples are classic recipes. But there's a lot of examples in a classic context of utilizing these drinks or these spirits, vermouths, as the base ingredients or as the part of the component of a base in a classic, and it really, I just think is it's a way to add greater texture, to add greater depth, or just to some sort of more differentiation of flavor from what you might see another Clover Club recipe that's just gin and raspberry syrup or grenadine and lemon, but the addition of the dry vermouth in this really kind of lengthens the whole thing, gives it more of a vinous texture. And again, it's like now we take this for granted that we're, bartenders like to substitute things. You like to plug in random little, like, oh, we'll split the base with this or that. And the vermouth splitting base measurement in a cocktail, the way that they do in the Clover Club, is like one of the first examples of like mixologists doing that kind of stuff back in the early 20th century. So it's funny that we're still doing that, performing those same actions on drink recipes to create complexity, differentiate from a standard recipe at whatever 130 years on or 120 years on from whenever that recipe first appears.
It is a really great example of like what would otherwise be a gin sour.
Yeah.
And it's definitely how I approach making cocktails. I'm like, oh, I made this great cocktail. I think that's a classic. And, but I'm like, but I'll just add vermouth to it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a whole new cocktail. And then just kind of taking a step back to the classic martini cocktail, I can't think of another cocktail that really embodies the evolution of vermouth in drinks, starting from, an ingredient made for and marketed for martinis, and then throughout cocktail history, getting some pushback. I have an example of an ad here, talking about the 10-to-1 martini. which nobody's ever ordered from me, thank God. But and then, even further pushback of make it extra dry, and I just want the martini to look at the bottle, right? And then, fast forward to today, where we're now doing, 50-50 martinis are very popular, and some might even question, are those a martini? And to be fair, this is a picture of a tattoo of a couple. They, I think, got their marriage tattoo. But I was like, I know somebody at Tails has a 50-50 martini tattoo. I just didn't know who. And I expect all of you to get them after this. But I think the 50-50 martini and its prevalence today, and it's being requested, just kind of shows the evolution of the martini. Would you agree?
For sure, and I think I'm trying to get more close to my mouth. I think I'm finding the distance here. Yeah, I mean, I think even for talking about the category of dry vermouth, something that of all the vermouths we're going to taste is the driest, is the least added sugar of anything that we're going to taste. Obviously, when you taste a martini with all these different ratios, like, it's clear that even the small amount of sugar, acidity, texture that the dry vermouth provides to that drink, I mean, is the difference between a well-balanced cocktail and just a cold glass of gin, which is kind of what we're coming out of the 80s and 90s, whatever, that sort of dark era of martini drinking. Even just like a 10-to-1 or like an In-N-Out or whatever, get higher ratios of dry vermouth, like that ingredient is so important to making that actually taste like a cocktail, like something you want to drink, because again, it's creating the texture that's actually gives a structure on your palate, makes it taste different from the front of your palate to the back. So, and then beyond that, it's just a question of where you fall on that spectrum, but they're all valid, right?
Well, on that note, I'm going to ask all of you how you each take your martinis.
I love a 2-to-1 martini. I love a good classic London dry gin, dry vermouth, stirred with a twist. If I'm feeling frisky, I'll do a 50-50. On Matt's point, I think that the seeing vermouth come back into martinis and in cocktails like the Clover Club dives right into what we can get our hands on now versus what we can get our hands on then. And it makes a big difference. And the product that we can get and the way that the product was stored, pulling it off of a shelf in that sits in the window of a back bar or something like that, or on your parents' vestibule in their dining room, does not make for a good anything. So.
Oh yeah, that's a crucial aspect, is where if it's dusty and under the hot lamps all the time. I mean, I like a 50-50 martini, which again, I guess we could have a fight afterwards whether or not that actually counts. But I will sometimes I'll do 50-50, but then I'll use Navy strength gin and completely invalidate the benefit of having the low ABV martini.
My guy, I get
by
it.
increasing the proof of the gin. But I was actually talking to someone at this pop-up that we did last night. I was like, what I would really like is to just have every dry vermouth and have a different vermouth, like different martini recipe for each combination of dry vermouth and gin, because I think that there's interesting, each combination of all of them. If I've had a million years and unlimited time and sobriety to do so or whatever, I would just, if you could balance each one in an interesting way and showcase the particular qualities of each gin and each dry vermouth or whatever combinations are sort of interesting, I think you can kind of find a sweet spot for a lot of different permutations of that. That's kind of the fun of playing around with that format.
Right, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Right?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
we're going to talk about that a little later. But
yeah, and as we get into the rest of the category and new American styles, whatever, then you just all kinds of different, like a reverse martini. Maybe that's the one that you want if you're really focused on the vermouth. So
I'm into it.
I like my martini cold.
that's the part. Yeah.
Somehow that's, thank you for being here. Thank you. I really believe that vermouth within cocktail is not something that adds or takes from the cocktail itself. It's just the atmosphere you want to create within the cocktail. So it's like a house. It's not the people that you have in the house. It's how you really dress your room. And that's what Vermouth brings. So knowing your Vermouth, you really know how you want to welcome your customers or how you want to be welcome. I drank my martini in 3 sips, in a way. That I drink martinis like you drink an espresso. So really, really fast. And I kind of gets you to the second martini. And then the third martini, I say, okay, can you change the recipe for me? But it's like, I'm a Gibson drinker, but this is my thing. I like pickle, I like the acidity. But really, there are not really like any, how can I say, there's no etiquetta on that. There's no really a manner to drink. I think temperature is very important. I think like regarding where you are in the way and what time of day you are, I can drink a different style martini. I like also, I'm kind of like 50-50 into it because I want to get the vermouth thing. I want to get the complexity that you might not get from a gin, maybe. The dry vermouth has the complexity, less sugar, so you get more the herbal, the depth of the vermouth itself. You get the perfect oxidation that you need to get your mouth watering, and the sapidity of maybe some herb and spices coming from the vermouth itself. So it's an entry level for everything that's coming after. I kind of most of the time I test the bars that I'm in by choosing a martini in a way that it's like when you go to a pizzeria, you order a margarita. If they know how to make a margarita, everything else is fine. And the martini is that. I always pair with food. I'm sorry. But for example, the Negroni for me is like the pasta al pomodoro, spaghetti with red tomato. If you know how to make that, everything else would be fantastic. And the Negroni is that related for 3 ingredients, but you know how to mix them because they are really, the ratio is very important. You have to know the dilution. You have to know your ingredients. Knowing your vermouth in a martini, especially in a dry martini, is very important. That comes through very much. And also, like, we have to think about our consumer. Let's try to give them the experience of the dry vermouth within the martini that we need. So that's my thing. I'm always thinking that most of the time when we drink a cocktail as a professional, we have to, so today is reintroducing the vermouth, but somehow today is also introducing the vermouth. This is our role here today. How can we introduce vermouth to consumer? So in a simple, very famous, very known cocktail that everybody knows, sometimes normal consumer are stressed or are scared of this drink. I think we should find a better way to let them approach on. So choosing the vermouth and the ratio is very important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all. A couple more dry vermouth cocktails. So just kind of taking this from a modifier into a main ingredient, which is a big part of our conversation today. I'm so glad to have the bamboo in my life. I think of it as like a friend and a partner in my social life because it's definitely been my like going out crutch. And if you have a bamboo on tap at your bar, especially, I'll be there. But, these are 2 great examples of very vermouth-forward cocktails. I don't know if either of you or any of you would like to.
Oh, I think I love the bamboo as well. And I think, Nightcap RIP is the bar in New York that used to go to all the time that had bamboos on tap, and that was like the best thing of all time. But, again, it's an interesting example because we think of the dry vermouth especially being like the most acidic, the least sugar of any of these styles here. But then when you pair it with Fino Sherry, it's like providing all of the structure in that drink just by virtue of how little sugar is in there. And then the fortification is you're balancing a wine that's even drier, like the driest wines on the planet. And it just kind of, again, sort of works to make it, that drink doesn't taste like, no one's going to confuse it for a glass of Fino Sherry, and it's because of the work that the dry vermouth is doing in there. So, one of my particular favorites.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. I'm a big sherry head, and so having a 50-50, sherry style martini is a fantastic thing, especially since it's not quite as strong as a typical martini, or if you're out drinking with Matt, he's gonna put that Navy strength gin on you. So it's a good low ABV cocktail to have. It's great when you're running around cities that are as hot as New Orleans. You just want to dip in somewhere and you've got heartburn from too much lime juice in your daiquiris or something like that. It's just a good comforting cocktail.
Yeah, I think you'll find that low ABV, while it's not, I don't want to pigeonhole vermouth into that category, but it's definitely a thread, I think, to follow as you think about how to utilize these more in your cocktails, and the importance of having that spectrum of different experiences for your guests, right? Because it's Cinderella's shoe, right? We are trying to find the right match for our guests so that they come back and know that we're doing our jobs as bartenders. So jumping into the second class, I wanted to talk about another style of vermouth that is also French in origin. Came shortly after the first commercial dry vermouth that we just tasted. This is, Chambéry is closer into the Alps. So when I was talking earlier about those Mediterranean flavors, a little bit salt-kissed essence from that Noilly Prat. Now we're talking about like a higher altitude, further from the sea, alpine herbs. I think of a lot of, some of my favorite alpine amaros when I drink these regional vermouths and aperitifs, and that's usually how I go about pairing with them. So this is, Dolan came out with a dry vermouth as well, but definitely a little bit more of a delicate style than the Noilly Prat. But they're really, I think like their hallmark product, for me at least, is the Blanc vermouth. So you have another kind of slightly drier style of vermouth that has a little bit more sugar, a little bit more of a richer mouthfeel, but definitely some of those same herbaceous, floral, citrus notes. But then we're starting to pick up a little of these baking spices that we're gonna taste in a few minutes with our sweet vermouths. So it's kind of that, is it Mama Bear's porridge? Is that right? Baby Bear's porridge? One of the bears there has a very balanced porridge and is right in the middle. And I think of Blanc vermouth as that. And it really is, I think, one of the most unique flavors to try to mix with. The classic, now classic white Negroni, so taking this very classic kind of bitter aperitif cocktail and turning it on its head into something that not only looks completely different, but also tastes completely different. And then also bringing vermouth into like where it meets rum, which I think is really a unique opportunity, because we tend to also pigeonhole rum sometimes into like tropical flavors and that citrus heartburn category. I don't even look at lime juice these days, but I think it's a great opportunity to find a stirred drink for rum drinkers. Would you like to, either of you?
I was just going to say, I think one of the other really interesting things, just Blanc vermouth, to try it in a classic like an El Presidente, or even in some of the, there's a classics kind of contemporaneous with that or earlier that call for like white vermouth, but with spirits, like aged spirits or stuff that you don't typically find meshes well with like a classic French dry style. The Blanc is kind of our like secret ingredient that I would try. Like a Brooklyn, for instance, is another one where like you just make every possible recipe you could find for that with a truly dry style of vermouth, and you're like, I just don't understand why this has persisted for 200 years. Like, why are we still talking about this? Because I can't get it to taste right. But with a Blanc vermouth, all of a sudden the additional sugar, can balance the astringency of a barrel-aged spirit, or it can just kind of help to tie everything together, like stand up to the perceived sweetness of something like an aged rum, and that can actually, help you to get, again, this sort of like lighter French style to like punch at the same weight class or with the same intensity of some of these other ingredients. And then to Nicola's point about the Gibson. I think if you like to put a little blanc vermouth in your Gibson and then put a little of the brine in there too, the sugar from that vermouth, balances the acidity of the brine, or even just from eating the onion if you don't like to make it a little dirty. But I think that's first time I saw that was Megan Dorman's Gibson recipe from I think it was probably Dear Irving in New York. But again, it's a really interesting example of how the extra sugar can help you to balance the other ingredients you're using in that case, and it makes a fantastic Gibson. So give that a try if you guys haven't already.
And sometimes sugar, I like to think of it, this is a great way to sweeten something without adding like simple. But sugar often is almost like salt. It lifts flavors. And so, Blanc Vermouth is a great way to like give body and lift other flavors in a cocktail. So it's a great modifier in that way. But it is also, I put Presidente in here twice.
Well, it's all. I think
It's that good.
different recipe for it.
Yeah.
Two.
This is
I
your
have two. No worries. I can take both.
We're all going for
Yeah.
El Presidentes
Yeah.
later.
I put a cobbler in here because it's one of my favorite cocktails. There was my first cobbler I actually had in New Orleans 8 years ago. I've been to Tales a lot. And there was a bar by the same people that did Cure, and they opened up a cobbler bar on the Circle, not too far from here. And I would remember just being blown away by the idea of a bar that was just about cobblers, and also the idea that I could get a cobbler to go. But ultimately, and I think if you asked really nicely, they would like make it a triple and put it in a quart container, which was like really key.
That might have been just you who got that treatment, but
But I love cobblers, whether it's vermouth or Bonal or any other type of fortified wine. A sherry cobbler, obviously, a classic, as another great example of taking vermouth and these fortified wines that are often used in citrus-forward cocktails and spirit-forward cocktails and bringing it into like a more refreshing format. So kind of like a julep, but much lower ABV.
Sure. I love Blanc Vermouth. Obviously the El Presidente, we can sit here and talk about that forever. We should probably go have some after this, but it may not be a cocktail for everybody. Not everybody's into the boozy stirred cocktails. I'm from Florida. It's 9 months of summer down there, so I love a good spritz. And if you're trying to get somebody into drinking vermouth, you walk away from this seminar like really pumped about vermouth, as we hope that you do. Slap a nice vermouth spritz in front of them on a hot day and watch them change their mind completely about what's in that glass.
I think this ties into, we'll touch a little bit on this. I want to make sure we jump ahead to make sure we cover everybody, but all the different styles. But a lot of these vermouth drinking traditions are based in European traditions. And you mentioned food earlier. I'm also I rarely am drinking if I'm not eating. And not eating if I'm not drinking, though that's been a little different these days. But this vermouth and fortified wines in general being very food friendly, and not just flavor, but also and low ABV, but also an experience. And so these are a couple great books, I think, if you're really interested more in that like French style of aperitif culture. And then that we'll see how it carries over into like Italy and Spain as well. So I want to jump over to sweet vermouth and kind of pass the baton over to Nicola to talk about the birth of sweet vermouth.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
birth of vermouth. So we're kind of going back in time a little bit.
Yes, thank you. Just going a little bit back on what we said before. Two of the things that I'm always never stressed to underline in the vermouth category is that vermouth is not an ingredient. Vermouth is a product meant to be drink neat. Everything you need is within the liquid. being a great product also can be an amazing ingredient, but this is what we want from a vermouth-based cocktail, is the vermouth. The other thing is that vermouth is mostly fits into the aperitivo moment, meaning that stimulates your appetite for all the things that we said, for acidity, minerality, the wine, the brine, the bitterness. And that are the key factors. Sugar is not really on that spectrum. Sugar kind of like give you the different effect. It stops your appetite. Okay, makes everything better. Of course, gives you the familiarity approach. That's why most of the aperitivo drinks, like Negroni, they start sweet and then bitter again, because you have to approach the drink easy. Because we're talking a product that was a remedy, it was a medicine. How do you get people to drink a medicine? Well, you just put some sugar in it. You got some flavor that are common to them, so orange, vanilla, and so forth. On the white vermouth, knowing the background of why a product was created is very important to understand the product himself. White vermouth was created for to open to more people drinking vermouth back in the day. So it was created for a more feminine palate or for a more feminine audience. When vermouth was invented, that was the first time normal people, would start drinking publicly. Drinking public for women was a thing back in the day, 1785, 1786 we Carpenter, we're talking about 1800s. So having something in your hand that was dark was not really a thing. So the white vermouth was created also for people could handle in their hand something more clear, white, very similar to a wine. So it was like kind of a thing to get more people close to the category. That is white vermouth also is a great opportunity still today. The trend of today of drinking in the daytime, drinking like before 7 o'clock, like thanks to the fact that we are kind of like broke that prejudice that drinking before 7 o'clock was not right. Is that the best way you drink? You can drink low ABV, you can have a nice product, you can drink earlier. So I'm drinking like clear cocktails, which is the trend today. All the cocktails are becoming clearer and clearer, like vermouth and soda, all the eyeballs trend. Vermouth fits in this space perfectly because it has all the characteristics that you mentioned. The wine, the nice sugar, and still maintaining the botanicals and all the characteristics of a real vermouth. So that was my thing on the white vermouth was missing to understand that there is a reason behind white vermouth and a great opportunity in the market today to introduce people to the category. Okay, coming to sweet vermouth. So we cannot talk about vermouth if we cannot talk about 1786 with Carpenter. We all know that. This is what everything was created in Torino, 1786. Now, just to again, when people ask me what is vermouth and what is the category, I always say that, well, first of all, vermouth should taste like vermouth. Simple as that. Vermouth doesn't taste like something else. Vermouth tastes like vermouth. And this is a very important statement because vermouth is like a perfect combination of the three main elements: the wine, the alcohol, and the botanicals, and the sugar, of course. Perfect balance. So this is one of the things that we really have to make sure that we transfer to people. They are looking for something that is similar to. Vermouth is its own category. It tastes like vermouth. In the terms of sweet vermouth, this is where everything started. We know that's the benchmark on how modern vermouth is made today. We have a clear example here with the Antica formula, with all the sweet Italian vermouth, that everything started in Torino, 1786. And how food is related to that? Well, the two things come together. People were having aromatized wine and then fortified, because actually it's the other way around. First of all, the wine were aromatized, and then when you start importing or moving from one city to another, you have to fortify them. So they were actually fortified to be able to travel. So back in the day, you have vermouth of the city, vermouth di città, and vermouth for travel, vermouth de viaggio. So they actually were more fortified. And people were drinking this wine, they were like aromatizing this wine because they were drinking this wine a l'ora del vermouth every day after they finished working on the field. They were drinking some vermouth, and of course they were having some food. Vermouth moment, the vermouth moment started around the food. People were having food outside their home and they were pairing that with vermouth. So the food and vermouth actually come first the food and then the vermouth. Vermouth was the perfect fitting because vermouth was fitting any type of habit. You were having like some savory, some salami, some cheese. Vermouth was perfect. But you could also have some cakes, some sweets, some chocolate, and vermouth again was perfect. So kind of the vermouth is one of the things I always try to push people to think about it is the fact that the vermouth himself is adapting himself to the habits. We don't really have to do the other way around. It's kind of like it's a really flexible. It has all the characteristics to adapt to any moment of the day, to any culture, to any habit. It's the wine that we are so familiar with. It's the sugar that we are so familiar with, and they are all the botanicals. They are so close to us. So this is one of the things that I love about the sweet vermouth, the ability of contaminate everything, but also the ability to adapt himself to any type of occasion. We started with the dry because I understand that on the tasting was appropriate, but everything started with a sweet vermouth. And was that, before that people were drinking Artemitic wines. So we started in China, but Artemitic wines is when we had the presence, okay? We had something similar, but we didn't have vermouth until 1786. Everything else was something that was similar to a fortified aromatized wine, but we never had vermouth as the recipe we know today until 1786. That's a clear statement we want to make. I think that also that's why the Torino Committee of Vermouth was born in Torino. Now today we have the Committee of Vermouth, Italian Vermouth, making that rules available for everybody to understand what is the story of sweet Italian vermouth. But this is not to scare people. One of the rules that we have is, one of the responsibilities that we have, again, is to get consumer and people closer to the category, okay? So that's why vermouth should be related to an easy drinking, to simple drinking, to low ABV drinking, because this is what we need to get people to close. Example here, we have sweet vermouth, Negroni Sbagliato Manhattan. Negroni Sbagliato is a great drink. It's became very popular. Everything comes through from a very simple cocktail, the Milano Torino, which was like vermouth and bitter together. Then we have vermouth bitter and soda, so we had Americano. Then we had the Negroni, and today we have the Negroni Sbagliato, which is a great way of approaching, again, the day drinking aperitivo. And Manhattan. On a Manhattan here, I'm a very big fan of Manhattan. I drink a Manhattan as aperitivo. I'm kind of fan also of the reverse Manhattan, which is kind of like bring that closer, not because it has more vermouth, but because it kind of like gets closer to the original recipe. I think that the 10-to-1 type of dry vermouth recipe for the martini also came from the fact that there was a shortage of vermouth in the market. So recipes start changing because the availability of vermouth was scarce in the market. So also that ratio within cocktails start changing, but also because we had the better ingredients for making the rest. In Manhattan, I kind of believe the first recipe were actually equal parts vermouth and whiskey, so to have like both a balance. Great drinks here. You can see that sweet vermouth, he's playing a gold role within the Negroni. In Negroni Sbagliato, you have that sweet vermouth inviting you to drink. Kind of the sweet vermouth here is kind of opening and closing the drinking experience. And within between, you have the bitterness of Campari, giving some structure. The bubbles kind of get the familiarity on the flavors, kind of like refresh them. And then the sweet vermouth with this charge of botanicals and bitters kind of closing the drinking experience. It's kind of, I think it's one of the best perfect drinking experience on the aperitivo category. On the sweet vermouth here again, on Antica Formula, for example, sweet vermouth in Manhattan is perfect to pair in those edges of the whiskey, kind of get the whiskey experience more familiar and easy to approach for the consumer. I became a big fan of Manhattan when I started drinking Manhattan with good vermouth. It's amazing. It was, again, in a drink like that, it was the vermouth actually get me closer to this drink. Now we have good vermouth available in the market everywhere. Manhattan has become one of my drinks. I can start appreciating this product thanks to that good vermouth choice. You made a mistake to give me a microphone. You know that.
Everyone up,
Big mistake.
everyone up here is very articulate, but I could listen to you speak about vermouth all day, Nicola. It's very poetic. I'm talking about drinking vermouth out of quart containers.
I've
you
been
bring-
surrounded by vermouth. You know, so let me say this, okay? It's such an honor today be able to talk about vermouth. I was 4 years old when my father opened the first bar. I remember my father putting 3 chairs together so I could fall asleep while he was closing the bar. These are brands that are with me since I was like really little. And be able today, as an Italian, also talking about this category being respected so much and getting the respect they deserve is great. It's fantastic. I want more people to talk about it. I want more company making vermouth. Because this is getting people closer to the category. I want the word to be spread because it kind of brings a benefit, and I'm honored of this. And I can see that what we promise as a product is totally delivered in the bottle and the drink. It is good. It makes drinks good. It makes people happy. It gets people closer to the industry as well. So this is why I'm here today.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I want to jump a little bit into sweet vermouth as not just a modifier or something to be enjoyed by itself, but also as a main ingredient. And Matthew, I don't know if this is actually is this your cocktail, the Trouble?
No, this is like it's from one of the Milk and Honey family of bars in New York, and again, it's like so ubiquitous that I don't know that exactly the point of origin off the dome, but it is again a great example of how to center sweet vermouth as an ingredient, in a cocktail. Like this drink is arguably more about the vermouth than the gin in terms of like just the composition of the whole thing. Like it's almost like a Pim's cup kind of a variation if you think about it. And the gin is just there to like provide some structure, the way that add alcohol to like carry the flavors of everything across your palate, especially when you lengthen it with seltzer. But the sweet vermouth is really the star of the show and is what's tying all of it together. The cucumber, strawberry, and to what Nicola was saying, I think it's the interesting thing about the sweet vermouth as a product, right, is that it's almost like, it's kind of it comes into being in parallel evolution with the cocktail, like an old fashioned, right? A cocktail at when that word first appears is just talking about spirit and sugar and bitters and water, and essentially this is everything that's in. It's obviously a wine base, but that's everything that's in the sweet vermouth. It's almost like a bottled cocktail on its own. It comes into being at around the same time for a similar reason, which is or out of a tradition of medicinal consumption of alcohol, and then all of a sudden you're like, but I think I could just enjoy drinking this on its own, right? And then so and that's how you see all these recipes kind of come out of. Again, the first Manhattan is just somebody going, well, I have a cocktail, which is just whiskey, probably sugar and bitters, and then they're like, I have this bottle. Vermouth ends up in the United States, and they're like, they have this vermouth is basically like a bottled cocktail. Why don't I just sub half of that in for whiskey, and then boom, there's a Manhattan, and that's like a whole lineage of cocktails born out of just, again, using the sweet vermouth first and other vermouths later as, again, not just an ingredient or a modifier, but like a core component of the drink. Like that cocktail needs that to, it's unique. It stands alone. It's not, you couldn't make that drink with something else and have it be the same thing. So anyways, all of which to say, Troublemaker, again, a good example of like the refreshing end of the spectrum here, but like a drink that, it is meant to showcase that ingredient and kind of hangs on the quality of that and the inclusion of that to really exist as its own thing. So,
like the French, a lot of drinking vermouth on the rocks, but we cannot argue that the Italian aperitivo is kind of the king of that category, and like Negronis, Spagliatos, Americanos, as you were saying, very food friendly. This is a book by Friends Spritz, which is another great reference point if you're looking to learn a little bit more about the Italian aperitivo category. And then I want to jump into our fourth tasting and the movement of vermouth into Spain. And I'll let Kurt kind of take it away.
For sure. Yeah, so quick history on Spanish vermouth is the early 1800s. It showed up in the port of Barcelona on through Italian traders. Shortly after that, the government kind of does what the government does, and they're like, oh, you like that? We're going to tax the shit out of it. So, yeah, so they started doing that. Obviously, vermouth sales are going to plummet a bit. The Spaniards were already in love with the category. So there's a small town about 2.5 hours south of Barcelona called Reus. And at one point, they had over 30 different vermouth makers in the area. Shortly after that, the city of Jerez was the second largest town, vermouth making town in Spain, and which is good for Lustau because that's where we're based. And what makes us really special is that we own our own vineyards. We create our own wines. You know, our sherries, and we use that to blend our vermouths. So we control everything from the ground to the bottle. You know, our wines are already sitting in their Criadera and Solera systems before they're blended. They're taken out by our master blender once he's chosen the right wines, and each botanical is macerated separately for different amounts of times for the correct extraction, and then blended together to make a really, really special vermouth. It's a blend of Amontillado, which is very nice and nutty and dry, you know, based on the Palomino Fino grape, and then a little bit of Pedro Jimenez, which is going to be nice and add a bit of sweetness and that velvety texture I think that we all love in sweet vermouth. It's going to add some good dried figs and sticky toffee notes as well. And if you've never had Spanish vermouth on the rocks with a slice of orange and an olive, that is what really changed my mind about the category. I may have had one too many of those. And as far as cocktails go, it's drinking very differently all throughout the country. If you're in Madrid, you see it everywhere on draft. The first cocktail, the Yayo, comes from a small bar in Madrid, and they have vermouth on tap, and it's a little bit of gin as well, and some soda water, squeeze a lemon. It's fantastic on a hot day. And then I'm a big gin fan. Gin was like the first spirit that I ever fell in love with, so we wanted to add this other cocktail into it. And it's just very, very, you know, obviously vermouth heavy with that slight undertones of gin, and then it finishes nice and slightly bitter with the Campari at the end. It's a perfect marriage.
And I think when you taste the sweet vermouth, our fourth glass from Spain, it's, you know, it definitely is like its own thing. You taste that sherry contribution, and I love kind of integrating, for me, sometimes the vermouths from Lusto into more heavier sherry cocktails, and kind of flipping it a little bit and changing it, because you're also then bringing in herbaceousness and flavors that you didn't otherwise have. And I've never been to Spain, hint, hint, Lusto. But, you know, I often daydream about, you know, the vermouth culture there as
Sure.
well, which, you know, again is so rooted in, you know, this aperitivo hour and kind of all-day experience.
It is I mean, vermouth in Spain is definitely a vibe. It is completely centered around food. You know, it's about long lunches in the afternoon, and have a glass of vermouth to open up your stomach and have a good meal, you know, with friends or family, and it's a great way to close out the meal as well. You know, I'll never forget doing a trip to the Basque Country with my wife, and we were driving around looking for a place to park, and there's this little bar on the hill overlooking the river there that kind of splits Bilbao, and big windows that you could just sit in the windowsills. And we just went in, and there was a tin on the wall that just had a picture of a glass with some liquid in it. It just said Vermouth. And I walked up to the bar and I was like, oh, can I take 2 of those? And we must have sat there for 3 or 4 hours just watching the world go by, drinking Spanish vermouth. And it's like one of those most beautiful memories that I could ever have. And I got to share it with a very special person. Yeah, so Spanish vermouth holds a very, very soft spot in my heart.
And I think, before we jump into the New World vermouth, like the ability of these French, Italian, Spanish vermouths to be transportive is really unique. Just like a lot of other very like terroir-specific, cultural-driven spirit beverages have that ability, just like food, music, vibe, to really transport you to another place. And as a person that loves, I've primarily bartended in a restaurant setting. I like the beverages are just as important to this experience. So these are great ways to kind of bring that into the bigger picture where you're bartending. We're gonna jump into New World vermouth. New World being, I don't know, a very general, weird term, but just kind of a larger category of vermouth expanding into out of Europe, and I think Spain and Spanish vermouth being a great segue into this. So you see a lot of vermouth in 1838 1838, the first vermouth imported into the U.S. 1938. And you see a lot of that industry start to boom, but then it being halted by World War II ultimately. And during that time period, there's a turn away from European products. There's also internally in the U.S., we're looking to conserve the production of grains for food. So there's a big rise in grape-based alcoholic beverages in the United States. And so while we don't typically I think of like vermouth, American-made vermouth as a historical category here, there has been a long history of vermouth, well, not long in comparison, but a long history of vermouth being made in the United States. Today, a lot of them, just like these European vermouths, are kind of rooted in terroir, but I like to think of them as anything goes. Some pay a little bit more attention to the wine. This is a Flora rosé vermouth. This is a collaboration. It's nice to have a female-made product up here as well. This is a collaboration between a natural wine importer and a great distiller. She makes a mass gin as well and a mass botanical spirits. And this is their example of a vermouth. And actually, I'm not gonna lie, we're all tasting this, I think, most of us for the first time right now. And this is, like I said, I'm sure you've seen lots of brands, mom and pop, lo-fi. There's some great ones. Imbue, I think, was like really one of the first American-made vermouths that's in our modern lexicon or liquor cabinet. And they're all wildly different. And some are referential to these classic styles, but some are also completely wildly different. And I would say that this is, to me, like a big grapefruit bomb. And I would love to have this as a low ABV Paloma almost. I think it would be really great for that. And then, taking those examples of European drinking culture and bringing it to the U.S. and brunch. And just this idea of us, I think, over the years, really focusing and making space for that low ABV conversation. Why have one when you can have many in a tempered way? There was a great panel right before us talking about wellness and balance, and Derek Brown wrote a great book, Mindful Mixology, and there's a lot of great new examples of no and low cocktails. The Art of the Shim being a great one, and I love that use of the word shim, like a table shim, something to steady you. While also not underestimating that this is still alcohol. So, it definitely catches up with you, but it's a nice way to kind of ease into those longer afternoons for bigger experiences. And then our final vermouth tasting before we get into the cocktail is Punti Mess. And I put it's like almost like the world's ready to drink category, I would say, is like the biggest new category right now. Everybody I know is working on a ready to drink, and I think Punti Mess, you guys kicked it off.
Yeah, most people don't know that by 1800 there were more than 120 different style of vermouth, only in Torino. So everybody was making his own version, his own style of vermouth. So there was a fact. Bitter vermouth or quinine vermouth was one of those. Thanks to the fact that people were getting used to the palate of vermouth, so they might require more complexity, more bitterness. And Carpano with Punta Mess kind of fall on that request. It is the first pre-batch cocktail, I would say. And if you can see, the label is actually replicating a vermouth bottle with a label on that says there is bitter and vermouth together in the bottle. That's what it looked like, so Punta Mess meaning. Punta Mess sets that starting in the trend of like getting your vermouth more complex, more getting into the botanical and bitterness edge. That says something a lot about consumers as well. The palate of consumers getting more educated and requesting more on that. I love the idea of just seeing a sign of vermouth and stopping for 2 hours. This is all about the, when I drink, I call Punta Mess on the rocks, I call them procrastination on the rocks. That's my thing. It's like really, this is what it's all about, aperitivo, just giving, that's what I said like an hour ago. What the best thing that vermouth can give you is time. That's the best present you get from drinking these products. Whatever vermouth is, whatever company, whatever region, that's what vermouth gives you time. Because you enjoy, you can drink, it's low ABV, and it's usually is with friends. It's never alone. It's fantastic, There's the magic of vermouth. Punta Mess, yes, leading category on 1870 on the first bitter vermouth. Today, this type of vermouth are becoming really popular. I always remind people that vermouth are not usually wine-driven, but they are mostly botanical-driven in the profile. Okay, wine should be more a container of the vermouth himself, and the botanical is what characterize the vermouth and the sugar content. On the bitter side, as I say, Carpano Punta Mess was one of the first, leading the category, creating the category of the bitter vermouth. We've seen more of those coming. What the bitter vermouth gives in the cocktail is the extra complexity. So kind of like can substitute, it could be the only ingredient within your cocktail. So that's why Italian Greyhound, that I tried so many times, I didn't know that was the name. It's my favorite drink. I always drink Punta Mess with soda, or Punta Mess with grapefruit juice, or Punta Mess with orange, and so forth. I like everything that a bitter vermouth gives me. It has the perfect everything inside. As you can drink it now, it has the sweet palate in the beginning, given to the darker color of the burnt sugar. So you add the burnt sugar. Usually, bitter vermouth have to have a great balance between the bitterness that is added by giving an extra amount of wormwood. So it's actually the wormwood that gives you the bitterness and the dryness of experience, and it's balanced with the burnt sugar to get that more approachable. In the drink, as I said, this is really the first ready-to-drink cocktail. It kind of stands on its own and fits perfectly the request that we had back in the day. Remember, aperitivo and digestive category is something that we give as an etiquette, as a label, just recently. Okay, this is a recent thing. Okay, products were not born as an aperitivo or as a digestive; they were just product, and then we decided what to do with that. So Punta Mess and all the bitter vermouth kind of fits that because they had both characteristics of being aperitivo and a digestive. You have that sweet and winey flavor for the aperitivo, but you also maintain the bitterness and the sharp effect of the roots for being a digestive. So it kind of fits perfectly in the market. That was the request of the market, having a product that I can do anything with that. So that is one of the main things that I appreciate on bitter vermouth. It is coming more and more. Bitter vermouth with a bitter hedge is something that is coming a lot in the market again. I don't know if this is true. I was talking with a panel like a month ago, and a guy said that, yeah, people are drinking more bitter because as a global population, we are getting older. And this is one of the things kind of like making me think that really the global population is getting older, so the palate's getting more requesting for complexity. So that's how the market is changing as well. Okay, it's not because we do parties that is the cocktail that we are drinking bitter. It's because actually the population is getting older, requesting more complexity, and wanted to have more of those flavors. So that's why again, like a nice opportunity with the bitter vermouth in the market.
The first time I had the Italian Greyhound, as I know it, is at Drink in Boston, one of the greats. And John Gertzen served it to me there, and it's kind of that perfect bitter aperitif moment. Perfect. And with the salt really working, salt kind of has this unique effect on bitter flavors. You add salt to Campari, for instance. It definitely changes everything. So this is a great example of such a simple cocktail, 2 ingredients with a garnish that really just brings an elevated experience so simply. And because a big part of that is the Punta Mess and it creating this complexity that's in the bottle and ready to go. And so I think we're able to see a lot of threads as we have talked through this tasting of like why vermouth now or why vermouth ever. And every year there's always that like, what are the trends of this year? And I feel like vermouth and fortified wine and low ABV cocktails have always been on that list for like the last 12 years. So at some point we have to stop calling it a trend and just acknowledge that it's here to stay, which I think we're all doing today in this room. But these are some of the things that we've touched on today in terms of like why vermouth, how it works in cocktails. We've talked a lot about, it bringing it lower ABV. We've talked a lot about food, which I almost feel bad that we didn't bring any food for you all, but to enjoy with these vermouths. But I think another thing is that appeal to wine drinkers as well. I think sometimes cocktails also get pigeonholed into like the before dinner moment when vermouth helps us kind of connect it to something that can be carried on throughout the meal. We were talking about martinis earlier. I prefer my martini with a side of steak tartare. So usually around the second course, I'll switch back to a cocktail and have a martini, and then go back to wine depending on what's happening. And
that's going to be a trend for whatever 2023 trends. You heard it here first. Is martini with steak tartare sidecar accoutrement.
Tartini.
Oh wow! See, yeah, it's just
trademark that. You heard it
just
here
put Claire's
first.
name under that when you publish that.
But there's always a time for vermouth. I think is. Just this is all part of that, is that you can have it at different parts of the day Maybe it'll make your brunch service go that much more smoothly if people are doing less Bloody Marys, stiff Bloody Marys, and maybe more easing into it with the vermouth cocktail. But one of the things we talked about as a group was, and we've touched on this a little bit, is the wide range of vermouth available now. And Nicola, you said this in the call, was that I think it was like the vermouth chooses the cocktail. Was that right?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually was him that translating my thinking into English. But yes, this is it's like having, as I said before, like vermouth kind of creates the atmosphere with your drink. So it's kind of like you can really have a wide range of vermouth, and then is the vermouth choosing the drink, and then choosing the person in front of you. I can expect to have I can drink Negroni with a different vermouth style, but I'm expecting different style of Negroni in a different area that I'm on, different bar, different venue, different part of the day. So you kind of choose the drink that you interpreted that my thought very well. Please translate for the crowd.
Oh yeah, I mean I think that's to the conversation about talking about dry vermouth before, and like I wish that I could just pick the perfect combination of dry vermouth with each gin and vice versa. That's the advantage sort of that to this category growing to the extent that it has over the last 10 years is that, obviously there are certain examples in each category that are, exemplary of the style, the Antica formula being one where you're like, we're always going to make a Manhattan with Antica formula because it makes sense in that particular drink. Like it's just the benchmark for that category. But when you encounter a new product like the rosé vermouth that we just tasted, or any of the other stuff that was mentioned, like lo-fi, or even new products by producers with as much history as Antica has, creating vermouths, like tasting those products and letting the product kind of determine what you're going to do creatively to showcase that product is kind of what the exciting part of the category is like, the cocktail that we're tasting now is a great example. It's with the Listau rosé vermouth, and it's got so much salinity from the the wines that are being used in the base. It really lends itself well to something like refreshing. This cocktail's got watermelon in it, so like it just is a perfect foil for that flavor. Like if you taste this vermouth on its own, it almost already tastes like watermelon to me, and that's like kind of everything else that's in this drink is just designed to pull that flavor out and to really, it's in conversation with the tasting notes that you got if you just sat there and tasted it on its own. And so that's the thing in general when we're talking about new products at Death & Co. That's kind of how we approach utilizing any of these things, is to taste the product on its own and say, what is this about? What is the spirit about, or vermouth about? What does it evoke on its own? And then figure out a way just to showcase that, not to cover it up or to let it be an ingredient, but to let's make this new interesting thing the star of whatever we're going to create with it. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Also, the fact that we have this wide range of vermouth available now also gives us the chance to understand that vermouth are more versatile than we thought. Okay, so we can really move from the classic cocktail that we thought we could do with vermouth, where we can really open to a whole lot of other type of drinks, like punches, welcome drinks, moose bush before the dinner, whatever. The world has changed. 12 years ago, sometimes I step in a bar and I see a bottle of vermouth just sitting on top of coffee machine for days to get in the right temperature, the right cooking.
Cellar temperature.
Yeah. And I was driving from Dallas to New Orleans a couple of days ago, and I saw a car with a sticker, if you're reading this, put your vermouth in the fridge. I'm like, all right. Things are changing, But because we get more confident in the fact that having this product in the bar is not an handicap, it's an opportunity. Vermouth are tools for us. And then getting closer to different brands, different products, we can be more creative and having the same product for making different drinks. So this is a perfect example. The same, I'll try you vermouth, I get the sapidity, the brine, and I get it here now in the drinks, fantastic, with a watermelon and mezcal, perfect. I mean, 10 years ago, we would never thought about that. You know, it was either Manhattan or maybe a Negroni, maybe a Rob Roy, and so forth. That's it.
Thank you. A lot of this touches on, so much of what we've talked about today touches on the complexity that is found in the bottle and what that brings to a cocktail in terms of flavor, aroma, texture. And I think it would be remiss if we, in 2022, if we didn't talk about how this plays into the cost effectiveness in your cocktail programs as well. We're not just first to talk about you're adding so much to a cocktail that cuts down a little bit on labor and prep. Instead of making more complex syrup, for instance, you kind of have something in your arsenal to work with. But also the fact, I'm like constantly shocked by how affordable these products are. Truly, you have Carpano coming in a liter, and Lusto products especially. I tend to make my cocktails. I always have really good costs, and the secret to that is because so much of I use vermouth as the base, and then I use something like mezcal as my modifier. So I completely switch it, which I think this cocktail is a great example of. I stole this from the Death & Co book. Tell your bosses I'm sorry.
That's probably the one I would have sent to you, so it's good. Great choice.
It's also on your little QR code. Buy the book too. It's great. But we think about how, as Matthew, you were saying, like how we're building and layering these flavors and trying to build complete cocktails and experiences, and vermouth really brings so much to the table in that way. And then we didn't spend a lot of time on botanicals, but these are some of the botanicals found in the rosé vermouth. And I think you can really identify how they kind of complement some of the flavors that we just had in Matthew's cocktail.
For sure, this vermouth works so well in this cocktail, and like Matthew said, he really wanted to accentuate that watermelon. Even though, I mean, it's crazy when you put all those botanicals together that this is the flavor that we pull out of it, But it's a really beautiful thing, and it was brought about just for basically rosé vermouths and tonics, which is fantastic. Again, a little play on a spritz, but it's. This and all the vermouths that we're tasting are just so complex, and they add so much. They give so much to any cocktail. So I implore you to just ask your reps for a couple of samples, and instead of spending a bunch of time and money from your bosses making a bunch of complex syrups or things like that, and just start playing around, and find the right vermouths for the cocktail that you're trying to make.
And we spend a lot of time talking about cocktails, but I also just want to say, like, when in doubt, vermouth on the rocks is a perfect drink, and
the best way to have it.
And people have been enjoying it forever, and I love these articles by the great Maggie Hoffman. Just again this trend piece, but we were talking earlier. When I used to do cocktail competitions and everybody's at the bar slamming drinks before the competition, I was always ordering the vermouth on the rocks. That was my secret way to ease into it. And, and I think these are great examples of how garnishes work, to complement the vermouth as well. I definitely have ideas about different garnishes for each of the vermouth we tasted. And we serve at Buddy in my bar in San Francisco, we have vermouth on the rocks as an option. Yeah. I just want to close out with my favorite Vermouth moment, which is from Groundhog's Day. And that was Annie McDowell ordered it several times in the movie. And I thought she was very sophisticated, which is what brings me here today, truly, was this inspiration. But we are, it's 2:27, and I've been told that our wonderful CAP team, who has laid out this tasting, made the cocktail, and I've done a million other things behind the scenes for this week, and are getting up way too early every day so that we can all enjoy Tales. They have a big job to flip this room. You all have our contacts. If you use that QR code, has all of our Instagrams on here if you want to ask questions or just reach out, or for good follows, I think. My baby registry is listed on my link in bio. Just and I think we'll all be hanging out for a little bit as well. But I'm going to ask everybody to grab whatever flavors are calling your names in your cocktail, and move along outside, and we'll be there. And I just want to thank our panel as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for coming out.
And thank you all.